The morning began like any ordinary day for most people entering the city courthouse, but for Corporal Daniel Reeve, it felt slightly different. He had traveled from a foreign nation as part of a diplomatic escort team, and although he had stood in countless halls, courts, and official buildings throughout his career, this courthouse carried a certain buzz that made him unusually alert. His tall posture, polished boots, and perfectly pressed uniform made him stand out the moment he stepped inside. Some people turned to look at him, admiring the calm confidence he carried. Others were simply curious. After all, it was not every day that a royal guard walked into a public courtroom. Daniel kept his eyes forward, walking with the steady pace he had practiced thousands of times. He was not here to impress anyone. He was here to do his job. The diplomat he accompanied would be observing a theft case, not because it involved him, but because the visiting delegation had been invited to learn about how the local justice system functioned. Daniel's responsibility was simple: stay close, stay aware, and make sure everything went smoothly. Inside Courtroom 4, the atmosphere felt heavy, as if the room itself understood how important the case was. Journalists filled the back rows, their cameras hunched on their laps like silent pets. Nearby, a few curious citizens settled into their seats, whispering softly about the case, the judge, and even about the tall foreign guard standing near the wall. Judge Harold Whitmore was already seated at the bench, flipping through pages of legal documents with a look that suggested he was already annoyed by something. People who knew him well understood that he was a talented judge with years of experience, but they also knew he had little patience for anything he considered unnecessary. His voice often came out sharp, his comments short, and his tolerance level was famously slim. From the moment Judge Whitmore lifted his eyes and noticed Daniel standing quietly beside the diplomats, something in his expression shifted. He paused mid-page, narrowed his eyes a little, and then returned to reading. But even while he continued flipping through documents, he kept glancing toward the guard every few moments. It was subtle at first, a quick look, almost like he was trying to figure out why a uniformed guard from another country was taking up space in his courtroom. Daniel noticed the glances, of course. He always noticed everything. But he kept still, maintaining the same composed stance he had held during countless ceremonies, marches, and official visits. His training emphasized calmness no matter the situation. Even if someone spoke loudly, questioned him, or acted in a way he found unusual, he was instructed to respond with absolute professionalism. The courtroom was a place of order, and Daniel respected that deeply. The diplomat he escorted, a calm and friendly individual named Minister Rowan Linton, gave Daniel a reassuring nod. It was his way of saying, "You're fine, just stand as you are." Daniel appreciated the gesture. Minister Linton knew people often stared at the Royal Guard uniform. It was unique. The polished metal buttons, the embroidered crest on the shoulder, the deep color of the jacket, all carefully designed to represent dignity and heritage. As the minutes passed, more people entered the courtroom. Lawyers whispered to each other while shuffling their notes. The defendant's family sat nervously in one corner, while the victim's relatives sat in another. The buzz of quiet conversations flowed around the room like soft waves, yet every few minutes, those conversations dipped into silence when people sensed the judge shifting in his chair. Judge Whitmore had a presence that demanded attention even when he did not speak. When the bailiff called the courtroom to order, the soft chatter settled. Everyone stood as the judge prepared to officially begin the session. But as the room quieted, the judge's eyes locked onto Daniel once again, this time with a more noticeable expression of irritation. It was not loud or spoken, but the tension was clear enough that a few people in the gallery exchanged confused looks. To Daniel, this was not surprising. He had learned from experience that not everyone understood why a royal guard would appear in a foreign courtroom. Some assumed he was part of local security. Others believed he was trying to show authority, but the truth was far simpler. He was there only because it was his duty to accompany the diplomat, and he would never interfere unless absolutely necessary. Still, he could sense that the judge's reaction was more than simple curiosity. It felt like something else, perhaps disapproval, perhaps annoyance, perhaps even misunderstanding. Daniel kept his posture steady. His training reminded him there was dignity in silence and professionalism, especially when he represented his nation in a foreign setting. A few spectators whispered softly, "Who's that guard? Is he part of some ceremony?" "No idea, but he looks important." Daniel heard every whisper without reacting to any of them. His focus remained on the diplomat seated only a few feet away. He scanned the room occasionally, not in suspicion, but in routine. He noticed the journalist quietly adjusting her notebook. He noticed the older man near the aisle fixing his glasses again and again. He noticed the young lawyer tapping his pen against his folder as if trying to calm his nerves before presenting his arguments. Every detail mattered to Daniel because staying aware helped him stay ready. The judge, on the other hand, seemed increasingly distracted by the guard's presence. At one point, he leaned slightly to his left, whispering something to the clerk. The clerk nodded but looked uncertain, as if unsure how to respond to the judge's concern. Even the lawyer standing at the podium noticed something unusual and briefly glanced at Daniel before continuing his preparations. Finally, after several long minutes, Judge Whitmore tapped his gavel lightly, signaling that the hearing would officially begin. His tone was firm as he welcomed the courtroom, but the edge in his voice made it clear he was not in the best mood. Perhaps he had a stressful morning. Perhaps he was irritated by the crowd. Or perhaps he simply disliked anything he considered out of the ordinary. If Daniel felt any discomfort, he did not show it. The calmness he held was not forced. It was part of who he was. He had learned years ago that people reacted in many different ways to uniforms. Some felt respect. Some felt curiosity. A few, like Judge Whitmore, felt irritation. But Daniel understood that not every situation required a response. Sometimes the best answer was quiet patience. As the opening statements began, the judge continued glancing toward Daniel. His eyebrows tightened with each look, as though the presence of a foreign guard in the courtroom was somehow distracting him. A few people in the gallery noticed, and although they tried to stay focused on the case, the tension between the judge and the silent guard created a subtle but undeniable unease in the room. Despite this, the diplomat remained calm, trusting that Daniel would continue doing his job exactly as expected. He knew Daniel's presence was harmless. He also knew the Royal Guard's code of conduct was strict and deeply rooted in respect. But the judge did not seem to understand that, or perhaps did not care. For now, Daniel simply waited, unaware of how dramatically the next moments would unfold, or how quickly the judge's irritation would turn into a situation that the courtroom would remember for a very long time. What began as a simple case hearing would soon become something no one in the room expected, all because of a misunderstanding that quietly grew between a silent guard and a frustrated judge. The courtroom had finally settled into a steady rhythm. Lawyers spoke clearly, the judge asked questions, and the audience listened with quiet interest. Yet, even with the case moving forward, the judge's attention kept drifting toward one person, Corporal Daniel Reeve. It was as if Daniel's presence created a small cloud of irritation in the judge's mind, making it difficult for him to stay fully focused on the case. Daniel, meanwhile, continued standing with calm professionalism. His posture was straight, hands neatly positioned behind his back, eyes alert but soft. He did not shift or fidget. He did not show discomfort or impatience. If anything, he looked like a statue carved with absolute discipline. For a few minutes, it seemed like the judge might ignore his frustrations and proceed normally. But then, just as the defense attorney began presenting a key piece of information, Judge Whitmore suddenly raised his hand. "One moment," he said, interrupting the attorney. Everyone went silent. The attorney stepped back, confused by the sudden stop. The judge leaned slightly forward and looked directly at Daniel again, his expression sharp and noticeably annoyed. "Before we continue," the judge said slowly, "I need to address something that is distracting this courtroom." People exchanged puzzled glances. What distraction? The room was quiet, the audience respectful, and the attorneys were presenting their information clearly. Only one person understood immediately what the judge meant: Daniel. The judge's next words confirmed it. "You," he said, pointing his finger toward Daniel. "Yes, you. The guard standing there like some kind of ceremonial statue. Why are you here?" A quiet gasp moved through the courtroom. No one expected the judge to speak so directly, especially toward a foreign representative. The diplomat sitting near Daniel shifted slightly, surprised but not yet alarmed. He assumed the judge might simply be misinformed and would calm down once he understood the situation. Daniel remained still and listened respectfully. "I am trying to conduct a legal hearing," the judge continued, "and I do not understand why a decorative uniform is standing in my courtroom like a display piece. This is not a parade ground." More whispers spread across the rows. Did he just say that to the guard? Why is he so upset? Isn't the guard here with the diplomat? Daniel heard the whispers, but his expression did not change. He understood that his appearance sometimes created curiosity, but this comment was unexpected. Still, he did not react emotionally. His training taught him to remain steady even when someone misunderstood his purpose. The diplomat, Minister Linton, politely raised his hand. "Your Honor," he said, hoping to calm the situation, "Corporal Reeve is simply here as part of my official escort. His presence is authorized." But the judge cut him off. "I am aware of who he is accompanying," the judge said sharply, "but this is a court of law, not a ceremonial hall. I do not need a costumed guard distracting my courtroom." A few people in the audience looked uncomfortable. Some lowered their eyes, unsure how to react to the judge's tone. Others watched Daniel closely, wondering if he would respond. Daniel did not move. He understood that speaking without permission would be inappropriate, but he also knew that he represented more than just himself. He represented his nation, his uniform, and the values he had sworn to uphold. The judge sighed, almost dramatically, and leaned back in his chair. "Honestly," he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I don't know why people feel the need to make everything look grand. We are here to settle a case, not to admire fancy outfits." The courtroom remained silent, heavy with awkward tension. Even the journalists stopped writing, sensing the moment had become more serious than a normal courtroom exchange. Daniel knew the judge's words were directed at him, and although they were disrespectful, he did not let the comments shake him. He remembered a lesson from his early training. Dignity is not measured by how someone treats you, but by how you respond. He waited for a clear moment, then took a small step forward and spoke in a calm, steady voice. "Your Honor," he said, "may I speak briefly?" The judge looked surprised, then narrowed his eyes. "Why do you need to speak?" Daniel kept his tone respectful. "Only to clarify my purpose here, so there is no misunderstanding." "Fine," the judge said, waving his hand dismissively. "Go on." Daniel nodded once. "I am here as part of the diplomatic escort for Minister Linton," he explained gently. "My presence is officially approved, and I am following the protocols of both our countries. I am not here to distract or interrupt the court. I will remain silent and still throughout the proceedings. My only goal is to perform my duty as required." His words were simple, calm, and respectful. Many people in the room nodded quietly, appreciating the clarity and professionalism in his explanation. But the judge did not seem satisfied. He crossed his arms. Yes, I understand your explanation," he said. But you must understand that your uniform is extremely unusual in this setting. It draws attention, and frankly, I find it unnecessary." A soft murmur moved through the spectators again. The judge added, "If you wish to observe, perhaps you could do so without standing so stiffly and dramatically. This is a courtroom, not a performance." Daniel felt the weight of the judge's words, but he responded with the same calm tone. "Your Honor, I am required to stand in this manner while on duty. It is part of my training and the expectations of my position." The judge rolled his eyes, an action almost everyone noticed. "Well," he said, "perhaps your nation's customs are a bit too theatrical for this environment." That comment crossed a line many people in the courtroom felt instantly. It was not only directed at Daniel, but also at the traditions and customs of an entire foreign delegation. Even the defense attorney shifted uncomfortably, sensing that the situation was becoming inappropriate. Daniel, however, kept his expression steady. He had faced difficult moments before, long hours of standing in hot weather, unexpected questions from dignitaries, sudden schedule changes. But this was different. This was personal, yet he refused to let frustration guide his response. With measured calmness, Daniel spoke once more. "Your Honor," he said, "I respect this court and its rules. I only ask that my presence be understood correctly. I am here under official duty, and my behavior will remain respectful throughout the hearing." His words were sincere and carried quiet dignity. But instead of showing understanding, the judge leaned forward and replied in a tone that stunned the room. "Well," he said, "I believe your presence is unnecessary, and I am not sure why our court must accommodate such displays. Perhaps next time, your delegation could leave the costumes at home." For a moment, the entire room felt frozen. The diplomat's eyes widened with disbelief. The journalists looked up sharply, as if unsure whether they had heard correctly. Even the bailiff shifted his stance, surprised by the judge's attitude. The judge had not simply questioned Daniel's presence. He had dismissed the significance of a uniform that represented a foreign government, tradition, and centuries of respectful service. Daniel took a slow breath. His voice remained calm, but there was a new firmness in it. "Your Honor," he said softly, "I understand your position. However, I must respectfully inform you that I am here under diplomatic authorization. Any formal complaint regarding my presence or uniform must be addressed through proper channels." His words were factual, not confrontational. They simply stated the reality. The judge waved his hand again, as if brushing away Daniel's explanation like dust. Yes, diplomatic procedures, protocols, all of that. I don't have time for these things right now. Let's proceed with the case." But the courtroom knew something important had just happened. The judge had brushed aside protocol. He had disrespected a foreign representative, and he had dismissed a formal warning with surprising carelessness. People watched Daniel with new awareness, realizing he had remained respectful even when spoken to unfairly. None of them knew that within minutes, this moment would trigger consequences the judge did not expect. And Daniel, still standing quietly, had no idea that help was already on the way. The courtroom slowly returned to its routine as the judge told everyone to continue with the hearing. But the atmosphere had changed. What had been a normal legal session now felt tense, filled with unspoken questions and quiet discomfort. Even though the lawyers tried to stay focused on their notes, they couldn't help glancing toward Daniel every few minutes. The audience, too, seemed distracted. People shifted in their seats, whispered softly, and cast uncertain looks toward the guard who had remained perfectly calm despite everything. Minister Linton, the diplomat Daniel was escorting, felt a growing concern. He had attended many international events and meetings, but he had rarely seen a situation where a judge spoke so sharply to a foreign representative. Still, he trusted Daniel's training and professionalism. Daniel knew how to stay composed even when someone else acted without understanding his role. Daniel, however, was aware that something important needed to be addressed. It was part of his duty to ensure that his presence was understood correctly and that his country's customs were respected. When the judge had made several comments that dismissed both his uniform and his duty, Daniel knew he needed to clarify matters in a slightly more formal way now, not to argue, not to challenge the judge, but to protect the dignity of the delegation he represented. A few minutes passed as the lawyer continued speaking. Then, seeing a small pause in the conversation, Daniel stepped forward just enough to be noticed, without interrupting rudely. "Your Honor," he said in a steady voice, "may I speak once more to offer clarification?" The courtroom fell silent again. Everyone expected the judge to refuse or respond sharply, but the judge allowed it with a dismissive sigh. "All right, but make it quick," Judge Whitmore said, waving his hand. Daniel nodded politely. "Thank you, Your Honor. I would like to explain something important. When a member of the Royal Guard escorts a diplomat, we follow specific rules and represent our country officially. If any concern arises regarding our presence, we are required to report it and request clarification through diplomatic channels." The judge raised an eyebrow. "And why are you telling me this?" Daniel continued in the same respectful tone. "Because I want to make sure there is no confusion. If I am questioned or spoken to in a way that suggests my presence is improper, I am required to notify the delegation. They will then contact the appropriate protocol officers to ensure everything is handled correctly." His words were simple, but their meaning was clear. He was not warning the judge as a threat. He was simply explaining how international procedure worked. A few people in the audience nodded quietly, understanding the seriousness behind the calm explanation. Even the lawyers paused their note-taking to listen more closely, but the judge leaned back with visible impatience. "Is that all? I don't need to hear about diplomatic policies in the middle of a hearing. This is a local court. We follow our rules, not foreign ones." Daniel knew he needed to choose his next words carefully. He spoke softly, but with unmistakable clarity. "Your Honor, I fully respect this court's rules. I am only informing you that as part of my duty, I must report certain interactions to the diplomatic team. It is not personal, and it is not intended to interrupt your proceedings. It is simply my obligation." The judge frowned. "So you're saying you will be reporting me?" Daniel remained calm. "I will be reporting the situation to ensure there are no misunderstandings. It is a standard procedure." A ripple of murmurs spread through the audience. People looked at one another, whispering things like, "Is this serious? Does this mean officials will come? What happens now?" Even though the guard's tone was gentle, the reality of international protocol made the moment feel heavy. Judge Whitmore tapped his fingers on the bench, clearly irritated. "You are making this far more dramatic than it needs to be," he said. "I do not care for these international formalities. This is my courtroom, and I will run it as I see fit." Daniel bowed his head slightly, a gesture of respect. "I understand, Your Honor. That is why I am explaining everything clearly now so there is no confusion later." The judge seemed frustrated by Daniel's calmness, as if he expected the guard to argue or react emotionally. But Daniel did neither. He simply returned to his original position, standing with the same quiet dignity he had shown all morning. After Daniel stepped back, the courtroom remained silent for a moment. The judge finally cleared his throat and told the attorney to continue speaking, though his voice sounded slightly unsteady as if he had been unexpectedly challenged. But in a way, he couldn't punish. Minister Linton leaned slightly toward Daniel and whispered softly, "You handled that very well." Daniel did not respond with words, but he gave a small, respectful nod. He was simply doing what his training demanded. About 5 minutes later, something subtle happened that only a few people noticed. The diplomat quietly took out his phone and typed a brief message. He did not look upset. He looked concerned. Daniel did not need to read the message to know what it was about. It was standard procedure. When a foreign official observes something that could create a misunderstanding between two governments, they must inform protocol officers. Minister Linton returned the phone to his pocket and sat calmly, as if nothing unusual had happened. But the wheels had already begun to turn, quietly, professionally, and officially. The case continued, but almost everyone in the room sensed a shift. The judge tried to speak with the same confidence as before, but occasionally his words stumbled or his tone wavered. He stole quick glances at the door as if expecting something, or hoping nothing unexpected would happen. Daniel stood silently, knowing that once a protocol report was submitted, actions would follow quickly. Diplomats valued peaceful cooperation, but they also valued respect. Not grand respect, not forced respect. Simply the basic courtesy required between nations. Minutes passed, and the tension in the courtroom grew thicker, though nothing outwardly dramatic had happened yet. The audience remained unusually attentive, sensing that something important was building beneath the surface. Even the journalists, who normally focused on the legal details of the case, kept their notebooks ready for whatever might happen next. Then, a soft but firm knock sounded at the courtroom door. The judge paused mid-sentence. Everyone turned their heads. The bailiff stepped to the door, opened it, and immediately straightened his back. Standing outside were two government protocol officers and a senior court marshal. All three wore official badges and carried documents that signaled formal authority. A quiet wave of surprise moved through the courtroom like a gentle breeze. No one expected such quick action. Daniel remained still, calm, steady, and unsurprised. Minister Linton folded his hands neatly, ready to speak if needed. The two protocol officers stepped inside, moving with calm professionalism. They approached the judge's bench. Their expressions were polite, but serious enough that everyone understood this was not a casual visit. The senior marshal nodded respectfully to the judge. "Your Honor, may we speak with you for a moment regarding an important protocol matter?" And just like that, the moment Daniel had predicted was now unfolding. The judge opened his mouth to respond, but he seemed to lose his words for a few seconds. That was the first time all morning that he looked uncertain. People in the room watched closely, sensing that what was about to happen would change the course of the entire hearing. Daniel, standing like a quiet pillar of discipline, simply waited. He had done his part with honesty and respect. Now it was time for the officials to do theirs. For a moment, the entire courtroom felt completely still, as if time itself had paused to watch what would happen next. The two protocol officers and the senior court marshal stood quietly at the front, waiting with patient professionalism. Their presence alone changed the energy in the room. People who had been whispering stopped immediately. Even the sound of someone adjusting a chair seemed too loud for the moment. Judge Whitmore took a slow breath, trying to regain the firm confidence he usually carried in his courtroom. He straightened up and attempted to speak with authority, but there was a noticeable strain in his voice. "What is the meaning of this? We are in the middle of a hearing." The senior marshal stepped forward slightly. "Your Honor, we understand. We apologize for the interruption, but this matter cannot wait. We need to discuss an important issue regarding international protocol." The judge frowned deeply, clearly unsettled. He looked from one officer to another, trying to understand the purpose of their sudden arrival. The courtroom remained silent, as though it was holding its breath. Even the lawyers had stopped flipping through their papers. Everyone could sense something unusual and important was unfolding. The protocol officers held formal files, not thick ones, but clearly official. The kind of documents that were used only for serious diplomatic communication. One officer stepped forward and spoke with calm courtesy. "Our office has received a communication from the visiting diplomatic team," he said. "It concerns a matter involving Corporal Daniel Reeve, who is present in the courtroom today." A soft wave of whispers passed through the audience, but the marshal raised a hand politely, and the room quieted again. Judge Whitmore's eyebrows lifted in surprise. "A matter involving him?" he asked, sounding confused but also defensive. "What matter?" The officer continued gently. "It has been reported that there may have been misunderstandings regarding the corporal's presence and the role he is fulfilling in the courtroom. As part of protocol, we are required to address the issue immediately." Daniel stood perfectly still near the diplomat, not reacting, not expressing any emotion. He already knew these officers would handle everything with professionalism. His face remained calm, showing only the quiet dignity of someone who had done his duty without hesitation. The judge appeared slightly shaken. He cleared his throat. "I do not see why this requires interrupting my hearing. I made a simple observation about the guard's presence. That is all." The senior marshal spoke with gentle firmness. "Your Honor, any comments directed toward an official representative of a foreign delegation must be handled with care, even if they are unintentional. We need to ensure that no diplomatic misunderstandings take place. That is why we are here." The judge shifted in his chair, visibly uncomfortable. His earlier confidence seemed to fade as the seriousness of the situation settled in. A few people in the gallery lowered their eyes, sympathetic but also aware that the judge had brought this situation upon himself by not showing the guard proper courtesy. The protocol officer added, "We would like to speak with you privately for a moment." The judge looked around helplessly. He did not want to leave the courtroom. He did not want to pause the hearing, but he also knew he could not refuse officials from the protocol office. Doing so would make the situation even more complicated. He let out a slow breath. "Very well," he said, though his voice sounded reluctant. He stood up and stepped down from the bench. The officers guided him toward a quiet corner near the side door, just far enough to prevent the public from hearing everything. The courtroom remained silent. The lawyers stood still. The journalists leaned forward in their seats but did not dare make noise. Everyone was curious, but no one dared speak. Daniel continued standing with calm control, watching quietly. He was not trying to make the judge uncomfortable. He simply understood that when protocol officers appeared, it meant they were handling the situation with the seriousness required. At the side of the courtroom, the officers spoke softly but clearly to the judge. Though the crowd could not hear their exact words, their tone was unmistakably firm. They explained the importance of respecting foreign representatives. They explained how unnecessary remarks, even mild ones, could create misunderstandings. They explained that a judge especially needed to maintain decorum at all times. Through the glass window of the side room, the audience could see the judge's expression shift multiple times. First annoyance, then confusion, then discomfort. He rubbed his forehead as he listened, occasionally nodding as if realizing the weight of his earlier comments. After several minutes, the officers closed the file they had brought and said a few final words. The judge seemed to protest briefly, raising a hand in mild frustration, but the marshal gently shook his head, reminding him of the seriousness of the matter. Finally, the judge stepped back toward the courtroom area with the officers following him. People straightened up in their seats, expecting him to continue the hearing. But instead of returning to the bench, the senior marshal addressed the courtroom. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "we appreciate your patience. At this moment, we must pause the hearing." The audience looked confused. Even the defense attorney blinked in surprise. The marshal continued, "Until the matter regarding diplomatic protocol is fully reviewed, Judge Whitmore will be temporarily removed from the courtroom." A breath of shock moved through the room like a gentle gust of wind. Some people covered their mouths. Others exchanged wide-eyed glances. No one had expected such a direct outcome. The judge's face turned slightly pale, though he tried to maintain composure. "This is unnecessary," he muttered, not loudly, but enough for the officers to hear. The protocol officer responded politely, "Your Honor, this measure is temporary. It is simply to ensure there is no further complication. We ask for your cooperation." The judge looked around the room, then at Daniel, then back to the officers. Finally, he sighed, slowly, heavily, and gave a small nod of reluctant acceptance. Two court-martials stepped forward, not to remove him forcibly, but to guide him respectfully toward the exit. The judge gathered his papers, though his hands shook just slightly. He walked with stiff dignity toward the door, his robe swaying lightly behind him. The courtroom watched as he left, silently, with no anger from anyone, only surprise and a quiet realization of how important respect and understanding truly were. Once the judge exited, one protocol officer turned to address the courtroom again. "A substitute judge will arrive shortly so the hearing may continue. We thank you for your patience and cooperation." The courtroom remained steady and respectful. Daniel stood exactly where he had been before. No pride in his expression, no triumph, only calm professionalism. He had not caused this situation. He had only followed his duty, politely and respectfully. And now the officials had handled the rest. Minister Linton leaned toward Daniel and whispered with quiet approval, "You maintained dignity through everything. Well done." Daniel gave a small, respectful nod. He felt no satisfaction in the judge's removal. He simply felt grateful that protocol had been followed and that the matter was being handled properly. Around the room, people whispered softly to each other. This all happened because of how he spoke to the guard. International protocol is serious. You can't ignore it. The guard stayed so calm. That's real discipline. The journalists scribbled notes quickly, knowing they had witnessed a rare moment in a courtroom, one that would be remembered not for noise or chaos, but for a quiet shift in authority that came through rules, respect, and calm professionalism. A few minutes later, a new judge entered, and the courtroom returned to order. People sat straighter, more attentive now, because they knew they had seen something unusual and meaningful. Daniel remained standing with the same quiet grace as before, proving that dignity is not measured by who speaks the loudest, but by who remains calm even when treated unfairly. And though the hearing continued, everyone knew the day's true turning point had already happened. After Judge Whitmore left the courtroom, a soft, thoughtful silence settled over the room. People were still processing what they had witnessed. It wasn't every day that a judge was asked to step aside in front of an entire courtroom. The moment felt important, almost historic, not because it was loud or dramatic, but because it happened so quietly and respectfully. Those watching knew they had witnessed something rare, something that showed how important kindness and respect truly were in official places. Daniel continued to stand in his original position, calm and composed. He did not move or show any reaction. If someone looked at him without knowing what had happened earlier, they might think nothing unusual had occurred at all. His stillness seemed to tell the room that things were under control, that everything was fine, and that the hearing would continue smoothly. His steady presence made many people feel more at ease. A new judge entered the room after a few minutes, walking with quiet steps and a gentle expression. This judge, Judge Marlowe, looked around the courtroom and nodded respectfully to everyone. Her presence felt peaceful, like a soft breeze calming a room after a long, tense conversation. She took her seat and greeted everyone warmly. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice calm but clear. "Thank you for your patience. I will be conducting the rest of today's hearing." The audience relaxed a little. Some people even took deeper breaths, as though finally releasing the tension they had been holding inside. The lawyers gathered their notes, getting ready to continue their presentations. Everything began to return to normal, or at least as close to normal as possible after such an unusual moment. Even with the courtroom moving forward again, People's thoughts kept drifting back to the events that had happened just minutes before. They continued to glance toward Daniel with quiet admiration. His calmness, his politeness, and his steady presence had left a strong impression on everyone. More importantly, he had maintained dignity even when spoken to unfairly, and the court officer's response had shown that respect always mattered. As the hearing continued, Minister Linton listened attentively, but occasionally he looked toward Daniel with a thoughtful expression. He understood the importance of representing their nation well, especially in foreign places, and he felt proud knowing that Daniel had done exactly that. The minister's pride wasn't loud or showy. It was the kind that strengthened trust and respect. Several people in the audience also felt moved by Daniel. They whispered things to each other quietly, trying not to disturb the hearing. He never raised his voice. He stayed respectful the whole time. He didn't cause any trouble. He just explained everything clearly. That's real discipline. A journalist in the back row wrote in her notebook, "A moment of dignity that changed the course of an entire courtroom." She underlined the sentence twice before continuing her notes. Judge Marlowe guided the hearing with fairness and patience. She listened closely to every attorney, never interrupting without reason. She asked questions when needed, but did so with courtesy. Her calm style helped restore the courtroom's atmosphere. Even though she never mentioned the earlier incident, her gentle manner seemed to lift the weight that had settled on everyone. Daniel's steady presence helped restore stability, too. He stood quietly at the side of the courtroom, his attention focused and his posture unchanged. His discipline seemed almost like a quiet reminder of what respect looked like in action. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't meant to draw attention. It was simply sincere and constant. At one point, as Daniel's presence continued to draw occasional admiring glances, a young intern sitting near the aisle leaned toward her colleague and whispered softly, "I hope I can stay that calm someday, even if someone speaks to me unfairly." Her colleague nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. As the hearing continued, the attorneys concluded their statements, and Judge Marlowe politely dismissed the room for a short break before she prepared her final remarks. People stood and stretched, relief easing into their faces. The earlier tension had fully dissolved. During the break, a few individuals approached Minister Linton quietly, not to intrude, but simply to express their appreciation. One lawyer said softly, "Your escort has remarkable professionalism. He handled the situation with great composure." Minister Linton smiled kindly. "Thank you. His training prepares him for many situations, but his character does the rest." Another person added, "I didn't realize how important protocol was. Today taught me something." The minister nodded. "Every country has its customs. We simply try to respect each other." Through all these conversations, Daniel remained in his place, silent and observant. He was not looking for praise, nor did he expect any thanks. He simply carried out his duty, letting others speak as they wished. When the break ended, everyone returned to their seats. Judge Marlowe re-entered the courtroom with her calm expression and announced her final conclusions for the case. She spoke clearly and thoughtfully, ensuring that both sides understood her reasoning. Her fairness was evident, and the audience listened with full attention. When she finished, she gave a gentle smile and said, "This hearing is now concluded. Thank you all for maintaining respect and patience throughout today's proceedings." As soon as she stood up, the entire courtroom rose, showing a silent gesture of appreciation for her professionalism. People gathered their belongings and began leaving the room slowly, but many paused before exiting, their eyes drifting one last time toward the tall, calm guard standing silently near the wall. Some offered him small smiles, others gave respectful nods. A few simply looked at him with quiet admiration before stepping out of the room. Even though no one spoke directly to him, their expressions said everything. They had seen how he handled an uncomfortable situation, and they understood the strength it took to remain respectful in the face of disregard. When the courtroom finally emptied, Minister Linton approached Daniel with a warm smile. "You did very well today," he said softly. "Not everyone could have remained so composed." Daniel bowed his head slightly. "Thank you, sir. I only followed my duty." His voice remained modest, without pride or complaint. The minister continued, "Your professionalism helped maintain peace in a moment that could have become complicated, and your calmness set an example for everyone in that room." Daniel listened quietly. He did not smile or boast. He simply accepted the words with humble appreciation. As they waited for the escort team to arrive, Daniel took a moment to reflect. He remembered the judge's initial irritation, the misunderstandings, and the officer's arrival. He thought about how quickly the situation had changed, not because of anger or loudness, but because he had chosen patience. His training had guided him, but so had his personal values. He understood that respect did not depend on how one was treated. It depended on how one chose to respond. And today had proven that responding with patience, clarity, and calm dignity could create a ripple of positive understanding, even in unexpected places. When the escort team arrived, Daniel and Minister Linton walked out of the courtroom together. The hallway outside was filled with soft conversations, but people stepped aside respectfully as they passed. A few even whispered quietly, "There goes the guard from the courtroom," but their words carried admiration, not curiosity. As Daniel walked beside the minister, his boots clicking softly against the floor, he felt no sense of victory, only a quiet sense of completeness. His role had been simple, but the outcome had been meaningful. He had stood with pride, spoken with respect, and let the protocols handle the rest. And although the court would move on, and people would return to their normal lives, many who had been inside that room would remember something important. That respect is not just a rule, but a strength. A strength that can change the direction of a moment, even without raising a voice. For Daniel, it was simply another day of duty. For everyone else, it was a lesson in calmness, dignity, and the quiet power of respect.